let's do this thing. Hello everyone. Right away I want to thank you for coming back to my channel for another video. Today I am talking about poetry, specifically why poetry can be so hard to understand, which maybe that sounds interesting, maybe that sounds boring, but nevertheless I think it can be worth your time to hear. For what it's worth, this is more or less the rundown I give to my undergraduate students at Johns Hopkins University, where I teach one reading and writing intensive course per semester. Most of my students don't want to be poets, and that's fine. They're smart kids, they make good decisions, they don't want to be poets. I can't blame them for that. No disrespect to any aspiring poets out there watching this. I'm just saying it's rough. Anyways though, my students don't really want to be poets. Not that many aspiring poets come into class, meaning I found pretty early on during my time teaching at Hopkins that I needed to approach my lectures differently than I might if there were more people per class who are interested in poetry to become poets. Really, all of this is to say that I don't think you have to want to be a poet to discover and apply many of the universally applicable lessons that we can learn from reading poetry. So in today's video, I'm really doing two things. I'm going to explain the value of poetry as I see it for the average person, if such a thing can even be said, regardless of whether or not they're interested in writing creatively. And the second thing I'm going to do is articulate why I think poetry can be so difficult to understand. This is something I've heard dozens of my undergraduates say during the years I've been teaching. They don't enjoy reading poetry because, quote, it's hard to understand, or quote, it doesn't make sense, which are critiques that I actually tend to agree with. I mean, at least they make sense to me. But I wholeheartedly believe that spending some time with some poetry can be something that helps transform us into better people. And that's what I want for myself. It's what I want for my students at Hopkins, and it's what I want for you, viewer. I want for all of us to be in a better position tomorrow than we are today, to actualize our full potential and achieve our goals. All I ask in return is that you please poke that little like button and let me know what you think in the comment section down below about poetry or the difficulty of poetry or writing or whatever. And now, without further ado, let's dive in. Before I talk about why poetry can be so difficult to understand, I want to talk about what I understand to be the value of poetry, again, if such a thing can be said. I think that doing this will help to better contextualize the cognitive effort that decoding a poem might require, which again, I'm going to get to in a minute. So by justifying the effort, I think I can help you optimize the time you spend reading a poem or a collection of poems. And that's my goal, because I don't want you wasting your time should you settle on a poet or a poem or a collection of poems. I want you getting the most out of the experience you possibly can. So that's what I'm trying to do, and here goes. So anyways, the value of poetry, that's what I'm talking about right now. I think the value of poetry, again, if such a thing can be said, mimics what might be the value of any other art form. Whatever poetry's value is, it's unique to poetry, but I think it kind of says more about art itself. And this is what I tell my students. They're young, they're between the ages of 18 and 22. So I tell them that now is the time to develop a habit of identifying and consuming what each of them believes to be great art. Basically, I want them to start making a habit of spending time with great art. Maybe to them, great art means paintings or movies, maybe it's literature, whatever it might be. It's something that I encourage them to think about. And I tell them this for a couple of reasons, but really for two big reasons. The first is that great art rewards us for our time, and this could mean anything. Basically, I think that when we allow our interest to guide us, and when we combine our interest with a willingness to apply ourselves, we get results, or we're at least more likely to get positive results. We learn more, whatever that art form might be for you. And the second reason is because art is a way of connecting ourselves with who we once were and consequently who we might end up being. And this is a little more abstract, so hopefully you can just kind of bear with me on it. because it does sound a little lofty, but I really do believe it. By spending time with an artist's work when we're young, we're developing a habit that won't just reward us for our time, meaning like teach us stuff. It's also a way we stay connected with our past selves. And I'll probably say more about this in a future video, but to be brief, I'll say this. The artists that influence us when we're young, or at least younger, their voices and works stay with us. They linger, they become a part of us that we can always turn to. In a commencement speech he gave at Stanford University, Steve Jobs said something along the lines of, the first 30 years of your life, you make your habits, and the second 30 years of your life, your habits make you. And I bring that quote up because I think it's worth considering that the time we spend with great art isn't really lost. It becomes a part of us, and it's something that, it grows with us as we move through life. So it's why I encourage my students to kind of start the habit to approach what they identify as great art early in life rather than later. Okay, but enough of that. On to the fun stuff. So without further ado, why can poetry be so difficult to understand? This is a question that everybody wants an answer to. It's incredible. Everybody from all corners of the world, all walks of life. Poetry is difficult to understand. No question about it. I don't think poems are they're not like TV shows or TikToks or YouTube videos. They aren't like firing on all cylinders constantly to overwhelm our dopamine receptors. Poetry, and this is what I tell my students, poetry is the most consolidated form of language, and that's important to remember when we consider why it's hard to understand. So I'll repeat myself. Poetry is the most consolidated form of language. So let's unpack that idea. Poetry is the most consolidated form of language. What do I mean? What I mean is a great poet like, say Robert Frost or William Shakespeare or Emily Dickinson or whoever. They aren't your basic run-of-the-mill writer, like your basic, reporting writer, like somebody who might write a magazine article that you come across. Which that's probably a surface level take, but the logic behind a poem's construction, this is my point. The logic behind a poem's construction is often primarily sonic in nature, and it's important that we understand this because while a regular piece of writing is likely most concerned with communicating an idea, I think poetry's emphasis is something more fundamental. It aims to make music of language. It aims to communicate an idea using the most necessary, which is to say, to bring me back to a point I made earlier, the most consolidated language possible. And this is really why poetry can be difficult to understand, and it's why poems tend to be significantly shorter than a novel or a short story. Poems tend to be very short, which isn't to say that all poems are very short, only that many poems are short. They're works of art that use sonic patterns to increase the chance that we remember them. It's easy to think about a rhyme scheme as being something that's kind of silly because, ring rhymes with bling, and that's very cute. But the reality is there's some kind of evolutionary reason that, rhyme has been developed in language and why it's kind of one of the patterns, one of the sonic patterns that rings in our ears. And that's because rhyme helps us remember. Rhyme increases the probability that we're able to draw on, what it is that comes next. If we have one word, if we have the A rhyme and then we have a B, and we know if we can anticipate that the poem is going to return to, AA, BB, it's more likely that whatever the lyrics are, they will linger in our minds. It's easier to put something to memory where there's kind of an underlying structure. And that's the value of rhyme. But, I don't want to get too bogged down in this, so let's keep going. The downside to that whole point I made, unfortunately, is that we have to approach a poem differently because it isn't working the way many of us are used to a piece of writing working. And because of that, we have to understand that the effort making sense of a poem requires is intentional And it's intentional anytime we're reading the work of a great poet. And it's the great poets that I'm trying to encourage you to find. I'm not gonna tell you who to go to, although if you want that, let me know what you think. Tell me you want it in the comments. Anyways, a poem is something the reader can work through and return to. It's like exercise for our brain because what we're basically doing is making sense of a carefully created linguistic puzzle. It's a kind of workout we can do, and not just any workout. That's right. It's a workout for our brain. And maybe you want that, maybe you don't. I'm just trying to make a case for it. This is what I tell my students at Hopkins. Again, the majority of my undergraduates don't want to be poets, and maybe you do want to be, in which case value of poetry probably doesn't need an explanation. Or maybe you don't want to be a poet, in which case it might be worthwhile to hear why I think it's valuable in spite or despite its difficulty. 15 minutes a day or every few days adds up quicker than you might think, and I hope you'll give it a try because it's been valuable for me, and I think it can be valuable for you too. If you're interested in poetry or not interested in poetry, or if you feel strongly about this video, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. The note I want to leave you on is this: poetry is music. It's not music the way we're used to hearing it, where somebody's like shredding a guitar, or they're playing a piano, or they're playing a trumpet. The reason poetry is still like music is because it aims to, just take the tools that are at its disposal, the linguistic tools in this case, and create a meaningful pattern structure that operates sonically. But okay, for now, that is everything that I've got. If you liked any of what you saw or found the video useful or helpful or whatever positive word might fit your experience best, I ask that you please pound that like button, slap that subscribe button, and say hi in the comments. I've really enjoyed talking with those of you that have reached out so far. And now I'm going to close out the video the way I always do, with some thank yous. First and foremost, I want to thank my best friends and video editors, Bach and Joe, for all of their help whipping these videos together. I couldn't upload these bad boys without their help. And I also want to thank you, my wonderful viewer, for clicking on this video and watching till the end. Really, we want to thank you for giving some of your time and your attention to this channel. We really appreciate it, and all we can say is thank you. And with that, everyone, I will bid you farewell. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you